Welcome all, welcome to our Entuity Tech Talk. Today we're going to review data export. Data export is a way of getting data out of the Entuity server and be used by other databases and applications. As most of you are aware, Tech Talks are designed for our customers and technical members of our authorized partner community. For yourselves, they are recorded and available on demand from the Entuity YouTube Center. They're a good resource for learning more about the products or reviewing features that you may be interested in implementing. My name is Parish Mistry. I'm a field systems engineer based here in the UK, looking after the EMEA operations. And with me today is my colleague Matt Tong, also a field systems engineer, and we'll be your host for the next 20 or so minutes. A few housekeeping rules. Before we get started today, we have put the call on mute. This is to eliminate any outside noise, but feel free to ask questions anytime via the chat panel. We'll have time at the end to answer any questions that have been posted. As you can see on the slide that's presented at the moment, today we are specifically talking about the latest Entuity product, which is version 16. This PowerPoint shows some of the enhancements of the last two revisions of Entuity Network Management. This is to give you a quick idea of what has been developed to keep our product current. So some of the key features for myself are around a whole new rewritten topology maps, the user-defined polling, as well as some of the enhancements around configuration management and event management systems. So with that, let's start the tech talk. Before we kind of go into the demonstration of utilizing data exports, I thought it would be worth just going through some use cases. So data export's been in the product for a number of releases now. It's a way of getting data out from the Entuity server and populate an external database, which then can be used by doing database queries as well as used by third-party applications. Some of the use cases we've seen talking to our customers have been around exporting inventory data out to maybe populate a spreadsheet. Again, we've got customers who've automated this using macros. We've had other customers who want to utilize the topology data to be used in other third-party tools. One of the more common uses is to use of time series data. For example, got a number of customers who want to keep raw data for a longer period, and rather than keeping it in reports, they'd rather export it out to an external database before roll-ups happen within the Entuity server, so they've got access to raw data for longer periods of time. Another example is in a multi-server environment, the ability to aggregate the data into a single database. Again, linked to the last use case is to use that to then do reporting independently from the monitoring. So again, if you're extensively using reporting, it may be worth utilizing data export to export the data out and letting the Entuity server continue with its day-to-day operations of monitoring your network, and then using the exported data for more extensive reporting. For our BMT customers out there, the data export is also the mechanism used for the ASIM integration, and we have some out-of-the-box data sets that you'll see when we go through the demonstration, as well as the ability to configure other data to be exported out. And again, for those who've got the TrueSight capacity optimization product, again, data export is used via our third-party integration via Moviri, that allows data to be used by the capacity optimization product. So data export, this slide here just shows the way data export works. The idea is there's a UI that allows you to create a data definition, which is the ability to go and get components and attributes that you want to export out. And then once you've got those, you can create a export job that can schedule that data to be exported out to the target database. So what we're going to be showing today is the ability to create a database and then export some inventory data. To be honest, this is in our documentation, but it's kind of hidden, and it's one of the areas that we're hopefully going to change. So we thought it was definitely worth showing you the creation of the database. That's the first thing you generally would have to do in using data export, and then showing how easy it is to export inventory data. So with that, I want to hand over to Matt Tong, who will actually take you through a simple demonstration of the data export capability. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Paresh. So welcome everybody. Hopefully you should all see my screen share at the moment. I'm presenting at the moment an example demo installation of Entuity 16. So my aim for today's demonstration will be to create an external database, as Paresh mentioned, which will be the host for my exported data. So what I want to do is I want to export some basic device inventory information out of my Entuity system into another database. So for this, I have an Entuity demo system running here in front of me, and also locally on this machine that we're looking at, I have an installation of MariaDB. Now, incidentally, this is actually an Entuity server as well, only because it made it easier for me to build that external database. But our recommendation typically is, if you want to export data from Entuity using data export, that you use the same database version and product that Entuity ships in our release. So to get that, you can look in your Getting Started guide, which you should find in your web user interface. But as you can see here, I've got a MariaDB running on a Windows machine. If I were to look at my databases currently in here, those of you familiar with the Entuity database architecture will recognize some of these database names. But to create a target database, so a database that I want my exported data to be placed inside of in the form of tables, I need to create this manually. Okay, so this is, as Paresh was saying, is in our documentation, but it's worth recapping how to do this, because there are a couple of commands to make sure that this database can be accessed from the other side. So very first command is very simple. We need to create the database with a name. So I'm just going to name mine target database. Okay, so now if I was to run another show databases, we can see I have my target database third from bottom in my list. But now the most important command is to make sure that that database can be accessed from an external system. Usually the default implementation of MariaDB or any SQL database for that matter can only be accessed locally. So to grant access from an external machine, we need to run a command which grants all access to my specified database, every table inside of my specified database. I can use a wildcard .star to specify that I want every table within there to be accessible. And I want to grant privileges to a specific user at a specific IP address. So this can be any user. Because I log in as admin on my other Entuity server, I'm going to use admin here. And I need the IP address of my Entuity server. I can also specify a password, which is recommended. So we can do that with the identified by, and then inside of these inverted commas, we can place the password that we want to use. For the purpose of my demo, I'll just use password. Okay, so we can test that access has been successful from the Entuity side when we go to configure our job. So we'll come back to this window, but now we'll move over to my Entuity server and look at how we can configure a data set. So as you can all see, I'm logged into my Entuity 16 server. I'm logged in as an administrator user, so I can see my administration menu. The data export feature by default is an administrator-only feature. You can grant access to other users with your account management settings, and they should then see underneath administration, data export. Now, there are two menu items underneath data export. My first one is data sets, which is where I can configure the actual data that I want to send out. And then jobs is configuring when I want that to be sent out, where to, and how often do I want that to happen. So obviously the first step is to configure what do we want sent out of the system. So when we go on to my data export datasets page, at the very top you can see I've got create new, and I've got 4 different types of datasets here. So the first one is our most simple, which is the one we're going to be covering today, which is object attributes. This is a way of accessing static attributes in my Entuity database, things like my device name, my port description, my port speed, my device serial number, static attributes which perhaps we aren't expecting to change too much, so we don't keep a history of them. The next one down is time series attributes. So on the other hand, these are things that we are polling on a regular basis, things like your device CPU utilization or your port utilization. When you build a time series attribute data set, we export the timestamp of that sample and also the value of that sample. Next one down is view membership. This will give you a list of every device and which view that device is in, or which views that device is in. And the one at the bottom will give you our topology link. So some of Entuity's automatic topology links, things like ports connected via CDP peers. So like I say, today we're going to cover the top one, object attributes. You can see at the bottom I've got some existing data sets. These are ones that I've already configured, or maybe ones that already come in the system. So object attributes. I need to define a name for my data set. So I'm going to call mine device attributes, and I'll give it a description. Now the next drop down is where I select the component that I want to choose attributes from. So if you were to choose this drop down, you can see we've got a lot of different object types that you can see in my Entuity database. Things like wireless access point antennas, device chassis, ports, sensors, and obviously more simply device. So if I go to D, I can see device. Now you might wonder why there are two devices here. I'll explain that the first one is my basic device. Now this covers all of my devices, including my ping-only devices, so things that we're not monitoring fully with SNMP. The next one down, I know it's quite confusing, they're both the same name, but when you select the next one down, we should see this target table change to device EX, which is my extended device. So this device EX object type holds things that we poll for SNMP, things like the serial number and the more detailed attributes that we want to use for this demonstration. So I'm going to use the second device object type down, device EX. Then on the left-hand side, I can see my attributes that are available for selection for this particular object type. So first of all, you might want to know the name of your device, which helps you to identify that on the other side. We might want to know the manufacturer of that device, the model number, the device type, is it a router, switch or a firewall, for example. And maybe we want to know the polled IP address, because the devices in my system are aliased, so I want to also have their polled IP address. Okay, so right at the bottom of this page we've got a preview button, and this will show me what my data set will look like once it's exported out of the system. So if I hit a preview, I can choose a view that I want to run that preview against. As I'm logged in as administrator, I can see all views and all objects, which is everything in the system. Or I could choose one of my specific views if I wanted to just export details from one office, perhaps. But I'm going to look at all views. It's quite a small system, so we shouldn't see too many devices here. So that gives you an example of what that data will look like on the other end once it's exported. We've got an object ID, which we can use to key that object on the other side. The device type is in here as a number, and device manufacturer, model, name of the device, and the polled IP address. So that looks okay. That looks the sort of thing I want to have. So I'm going to save that data set, and now we can see that data set definition down the bottom here, device attributes. I can come back in and edit it, and because it's one that a user has created and not one that Entuity has shipped out of a box, we can delete it as well. You'll notice these ones at the bottom we're unable to delete or edit. Okay, so now I need to define where that data set needs to be exported to and how often I want that to happen. So for this, I go to my jobs page. Now again, we've got a create new up at the top, which is where we define our new data export job. And down at the bottom, I've got some existing jobs. One is, for example, is my export to Atrium CMDB, as Paresh mentioned at the start. Data export is a method we use to integrate into third-party CMDB products such as BMC's Atrium. So I'm going to create a new one for this. So new job, I then need to give it a name, a description, and I want this job enabled. I can then again select the view that I want to export from. Once again, I'll choose all views, and I can select a schedule. So if I wanted a weekly export of my device inventory, I can choose weekly. I can have it on a daily basis or monthly. Or if I were to choose never here, it would just be a manual task, which you can run manually in the Entuity web user interface. So I'm just going to set mine to weekly. Next two items are backfill and age out. So backfill defines how much data should we go back and fill in if for any reason this data export job isn't successful. So if I've scheduled this to happen daily and for some reason my data export job doesn't run one day, maybe my Entuity server was down at that time or it wasn't able to access the other database, then backfill would go and fill in that data from the time that it missed. Okay, so I'm just going to leave mine at the default 2 days, and the age out I'll leave at 2 weeks. Age out is if data disappears. So in my example here, if a device was to be taken out of the system 2 weeks ago, we would remove that device from my database table on the other side. Similarly, if I was exporting time series information and I had a 2-week age out, it would remove samples older than 2 weeks in my target table. So if you wanted to keep data any longer than the maximum 6 months, you would have to remove this data from that target table and put it somewhere else. So a table that Entuity is not accessing. Okay, so I'll leave mine set to 2 weeks. So here's the important part. This is where we define which target database or where we want this data to be exported to. So first up is my server. So this is just the IP address that is hosting my database. Next is the database name itself. So if you remember, I named mine target database, and I chose admin as my user and password. And here you can test the connection just to make sure that we've set it up okay. So luckily we've got a database connect OK at the top, so we know that Entuity has access to write and read from that database on the other side, which is good. Okay, so now we can choose at the bottom which data set or which data sets we want to include in this export job. We can include multiple. For the purpose of this example, I'm just going to include that device attributes data set which we created at the beginning. And I can move that over to my selected side. Now I save and I've created that job. You'll notice because I chose enabled, we've got an enabled checkbox here. We've also got the ability to come back in and edit that job, delete it, look at the history, and run it on demand. So because I chose a weekly export for this job, this will happen on a Sunday at midnight, or a Monday at midnight, whichever way you want to put it. But I can also run this manually. So if I were to hit run here, it places that job into my data export queue. So my queue size is 1. And the way we can see whether that was successful or not is going to the history. We've got what time it was entered into the queue, when it started, and when it finished. Obviously, as you can see, this is quite a small system, and that happened within the second, and it completed successfully, so we know that that was okay. Obviously, now we want to check that the data is on the other side, so I'm going to bring back up my local database, and I'm going to go into my target database. So use target database, and in here I can show the tables which before would have been empty, but now Entuity has created 3 tables inside of there. One is my export job, which will tell us what time a job was run, whether it was successful or not, and my update log will tell me about any updates it has made to any data in there, if it's had to change anything. But the important part, which is where our data actually is inside SWO device EX. Now remember, we could have changed that name on the dataset side when we created that dataset, but I just left it as the default. So I'm just going to do a simple select star from device EX to have a look at everything in there. And there's my data. So I've got names for all of my devices. I've got manufacturer, model number, IP address. And at the very start, we've got things like my job ID, which is which instance of that job did this data come from. So this was the first time this job was run, so it's in there as a job ID of 1. Object ID, and my create time is in the form of a Unix timestamp, which will tell me which time that entry was placed inside of this table. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to show you for this example today. So I'll hand back to Paresh, and we'll take some questions if we've got any.
Yep, so let's see if there's any questions. Pat, are there any questions coming in?
A couple on the chat panel. If a device attribute were to change in your example, would the entry in the export database be updated, or would there be a new row written?
Okay, that's a good question. So what happens is, because I'm exporting object attributes here, now I mentioned that these are things that we don't expect to change, but obviously sometimes they can change things. In my example, maybe my polled IP address might change, maybe my device name might change, or if I was exporting out version number for my device, that might change. So in that situation, and this is one I can easily demonstrate because I can quickly go into my inventory for this server and change a name of one of my devices. So if my device HQ02 were to change its name, so I'll just modify that name, and using my custom device aliasing, I can give it an example name. So okay, so now that device name has changed. So the question was, what would happen on the other side? Would it put a new row in there, or would it update the current row? So let's have a look at what it will do. So if I go back into my data export jobs, and I'll rerun my device attribute job. Remember, I can manually run it by hitting run here, which has placed it into the queue. And if it was as fast as it was last time, it's completed. So let's go and check what it has done to my data set. And if I do another select star, we can see my second entry here now has a modified time. So this is the time that that entry has been changed. And we can see that underneath my name column, my name has been updated. So the HQ02 entry from before isn't there anymore. It's been updated. Well, it is there. It's been updated. We haven't put a new row in there. And similarly, if my HQ02 device were to be deleted, we would have a deletion time in here. And then after my age out had passed from my job, remember I defined 2 weeks, then that entry would be removed from this table. So in terms of modifying attributes, we would update the current entry and place a modified time in there. In terms of deleting, we would place a delete time and remove it from that table after the age out has passed. So hopefully that answers the question.
One last question, I think. Will this data export work on a consolidated server, or is it server by server?
Okay, yeah, another good question. It's server by server. So if you have a distributed Entuity architecture, so if you have polling servers consolidated together with a consolidation server, you would need to define data export from the polling servers, from the individual polling servers. Now that's because the polling servers in Entuity, they do the polling and they also hold their own data within their own database. So if you were to set a data export up from a consolidation server, it wouldn't actually hold much data around the devices. It's the individual polling servers that have this data inside of them. So you would need to set up data export for every polling server that you were interested in exporting data from.
Okay, so it looks like there's no more questions. However, those on the call, feel free to use the tech.talks@entuity.com for any questions you may have later on, or if you've got any suggestions for Tech Talk topics for future Tech Talks, again, please use that email address. Okay, so all that's left to do is to say thanks for attending. There will be a video link that will be sent to you with today's presentation for your use. And if you have any further questions on data exports, you're also able to contact your local Entuity field and system engineers. So that will be for the EMEA region, that will be me and Matt at this stage. Lastly, as you can see on the screen, please make note of the next tech talk, which will be around Entuity and BMT TrueSite integration capabilities, and that will be held on the 8th of June, and details will be mailed out nearer the time. From now, it's thanks for attending, and look forward to seeing you all on the next tech talk. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Goodbye.